In order for antibiotics to cause harm to a bacteria, it needs to bind to something within it, a so-called target site, which in turn will cause some type of effect that negatively affects the bacteria's overall ability to survive. Antibiotic resistance are different types of mechanisms that somehow hinders the antibiotic to bind where it needs in order to have any actual effect on the bacteria. And there are four main types of antibiotic resistance. Limiting uptake of the drug. For us humans, the skin works as a natural defense against microbes to get inside our body. Bacteria also have a natural barrier, like a cell wall or a cell membrane, that could hinder certain types of antibiotics to enter. A bacteria also have porins, a sort of tunnel from the outside to the inside, where certain drugs like antibiotics can enter. In order to have their desired effect, the antibiotics need to get inside of the bacteria. So if the bacteria makes changes to this barrier or reduces the amount of porins, it will become more resistant due to the fact that it's much harder for the antibiotics to get inside. Modifying drug target site. If an antibiotic gets inside of a bacteria, it needs to bind to something that will negatively affect it. There are many different targets, but they usually bind to something very specific. But if the target they are supposed to bind to changes, then they can no longer bind to it, and if the binding doesn't happen, the antibiotic won't have any function. An example of this would be the multidrug resistant variant of Staphylococcus aureus called MRSA. It has a modified version of the so-called penicillin binding protein, a bacterial enzyme which the antibiotic penicillin and others like it binds to. But because of the modified version of this enzyme in MRSA, it is resistant to several antibiotics compared to the other strains of Staphylococcus aureus. Enzymatic inactivation of a drug. This is where the bacteria produce enzymes that specifically targets antibiotics directly. They bind to the antibiotic when it enters and destroy the part that is necessary for its effect. This mechanism is why most Staphylococcus aureus today are resistant to penicillin. They have enzymes that target and destroy the penicillin molecule, making it unable to bind to the penicillin binding protein where it normally would have its effect. Drug efflux pumps. Efflux pumps are systems that can pump out toxic compounds within the bacteria, and many have them naturally as a way to remove substances that can be harmful. Some of these can be very good at pumping out several types of antibiotics, which for the bacteria is a very toxic compound. Once outside of the bacteria, the antibiotics won't be able to bind to the target site and will not have any negative effect on the bacteria. Because of these mechanisms and their ability to improve them, it is getting increasingly harder to treat bacterial infections. Penicillin used to be effective against Staphylococcus aureus, but today most of them are resistant to it, due to enzymatic inactivation of the penicillin drug.